Were you at the MS-13 trial?
I was, yeah, as a defendant.
The news comes out.
Right.
Public comes in the MS-13. Actually, just had Michelle McPhee in studio here talking
Yeah,
about covering it.
Saw that.
Very interesting. I asked her. I thought it would have been a media circus, and she says it's not.
Yeah,
Yeah.
quite dignified.
That apparently
Yeah,
that
quite demure.
I'm blown away.
By the way, I got to say that this guy's doing great stuff. This is a huge book area. A lot of famous writers who lived here or moved through here. Maybe a few more in Newport than in Providence, but a lot around here too. And I think that something could be cultivated. As long as it's not about H.P. Lovecraft, who was so boring.
A little controversial as well. We've had.
I'm flaming racist, sort of a pre-Nazi Nazi, but.
Did you read Ray Rickman's musings on him
Yeah,
recently?
I did. No, I didn't know that much about the racist side. I just always found his stuff ridiculous.
Well, if you want to support books and support the libraries,
yeah.
do you want to go rappelling over the edge of the Regency Plaza?
I think today, the way I feel, I think I'll just soon jump off the roof.
No!
Why rappel?
Well, it sounds like a good fundraiser. There's so much other going on that I think might be fodder for your columns. But let's talk about D.C. first.
Yeah.
Let's talk about President Trump and the proposal for the military parade.
Yeah, terrible idea. We've had some parades sort of like that, a little lower key than what he has in mind, but usually after winning a war. The last one was after the first Iraq War, the so-called Gulf War, which we celebrated as a victory, even though what happened later on didn't make it sound that much of a victory. But look, in retrospect, how victorious really was the Gulf War. We had something of a military parade then after World War II and after World War I, but this is basically classic banana republic, North Korea, Russia, Red Square, showing off, in which the tyrant gets up there and shows everybody how important he is.
I mean,
I think also there's a more insidious aspect of this. I think there's always sort of a little bit of an implied threat to people within the country that, you've got a regime showing off all these tanks and various guns and so on. So if you don't cooperate with a maximum leader, something bad may happen to you. So this is sort of a implied threat in the whole thing. I think it's ridiculous. I hope they don't do it. It'll probably cost $100 million. It'll tear up the asphalt, on Pennsylvania Avenue. It's just the stupidest thing. And most of the generals, the ones that don't have to report directly to the president, are saying it's idiotic.
Well, it seemed like it kind of came out of left field.
Yeah, well, it's typical. It's just, whimsy, kind of a whim of iron. A whim of iron. But I think the president sees this great opportunity for photo ops. He's up there in the reviewing stand, like that, while the tanks are going by. Somebody suggested perhaps we'll have nuclear missiles, too, just to scare the hell out of somebody. Scare the hell out of the Democrats.
Well, we'll see what happens at the parade moving forward. But speaking of scared, the Trump administration and the White House has an issue on their hand.
Only one?
Has another issue on their hand with former staffer Rob Porter.
Yeah. As we were talking in the green room, who happens to be the son of a very famous professor at the Harvard Business School.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh well.
But let's talk a little bit about this, because it seems that ex-wives have come forward. I mean, the press was he's dating Hope Hicks. And now these women say that they had brought these allegations and pictures and
before he was hired, before he was hired, and he never went through a standard security clearance.
Well, the question is, did he go through security clearance, not given security clearance? And now the White House is trying to step away from this and trying to say disavow and say that the allegations aren't true.
And he was handling all this classified material, all the communications. He was basically the correspondence secretary for the president. So all this secret stuff is going through this guy.
He stepped down, so he's no longer at the White House. So, I mean, do we envision that we'll see more? I mean, again, we've seen...
I think he'll probably have a radio talk show. Yeah? Entirely possible. Kind of a good-looking guy, I'm sure he's very articulate. Or he could run for governor of Oklahoma.
Well, we'll see what happens. That's inside D.C. Let's go a little bit closer here. Rob Borges with the Boston Herald.
Yeah, that's a sad tale.
It's a very sad tale.
I just heard about that, Kate, before coming on. A friend of mine at the Boston Guardian told me about that. But I think you had some good points again earlier in the green room, where all the work happens here.
The real conversations take place.
This is all heavily edited. It's so easy for someone to be fooled. Your example, the Washington Post, the bogus
Roy Moore accuser.
It was a setup to try to make the Washington Post look irresponsible and sloppy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they went through and they made a point of pointing out this person, saying,
right.
here's all the inconsistencies that don't line up.
They
But here you
talked to
have
a lot of other people, and they clarified this was a fraud. But that would have been a very, very easy fraud to be taken in by.
in this day and age, you saw the text messages that looked like the person
Oh,
purporting to be
yeah.
Brady's
Right.
agent saying, well, I'll just go talk with another sports writer then. You
Yeah.
think you've got the biggest story in
Yeah.
the country and
Yeah.
the world.
And he was working for the Herald, right?
Yes.
So, well, I just got a note from Tim Leland. Does that ring a bell? He was the head of the Spotlight team. He's sort of a friend, and he worked for the Globe. But he said, oh, yeah, he was a sports writer at the Globe until he was fired. So I don't know
the backstory
something
there.
Like, yeah, there's always a backstory.
Huh,
Yeah.
but it's tough. Again, we get pitches all the time that don't pass muster, and it's very easy. So in that profession, you feel for this
It gets tougher and tougher,
situation.
Kate, with the internet. I've been taken in maybe once or twice because a number of other people whom I trust have been taken in too. But I think the internet makes it much easier makes it much more vulnerably taken in. And with the destruction of paid journalism, the lack of staffing, the fact that the journalists and the editors are so harried, this kind of thing is much more likely to happen.
There'd been an incident a couple months ago. It was someone made it looked just like a Sports Illustrated page. It looked like the Washington Redskins were changing their mascot, and it really looked like it.
Yeah.
But when you went to click on the different sections, you couldn't go anywhere because it was a fraud.
That's right.
But it really
like
well.
a PDF kind of, yeah. But I think some of it's staffing. I think it's the instantaneousness that's expected now of news stories. So there's less. I mean, the news business, the daily news business, was always very rushed and a lot of pressure, very fast. But it's gone to a whole new level with Twitter and so. So even the people working for the mainstream media, the big old newspapers and all that, they're under tremendous pressure to put stuff out. Twitter. Various other electronic things, not just on the paper itself.
I hear you. I hear you on that.
So it's a problem. Yeah, but,
it's a tough situation to be in. But I figured I'd pick your brain about it, being from that world.
Yeah.
Olympics, any interest?
No, frankly, no. I think the only interest is really the geopolitics of this, where the North Koreans sort of collaborating with the South Koreans on this thing. The location is interesting. The description of the terrain and climate intrigued me because it sounded just like St. Johnsbury, Vermont. the way everything, or maybe the White Mountains, sort of looks like that, about 5 degrees above zero, these sort of scraggly forests, and it looked pretty grim.
Well, we'll see. I'm sure people will break down what the numbers are.
I don't like the Olympics bore me. I have to confess.
So we will not be reading about the Olympics in your column this weekend.
You might.
I might if something happens.
You might.
What else are we
I
going to...
don't want to talk about Tom Brady. Now, Tom Brady is suggesting that he will not retire. And I hope he will, because as we've said before, and I think Rob Gronkowski is more realistic about that. He's only 28. The effect of being hit in the head, not just concussions, but milder repeated hits, can be insidious. And, we'd all hate to see the very, very bright, engaging Tom Brady drooling in 5 years.
Well, there's the talk, he's got such a healthy diet and he takes
No,
care of his body, but there's
there's
nothing can do it. No, all the kale in the world.
No, you can't do that. So I say that. I mean, who cares? Who cares what I think about that? But I think there's a broader lesson for people who have had jobs and with that kind of trauma. Almost every game you're getting hit.
Do we see football as we know it in 10, 20 years? Exist?
I would not be surprised if professional football as we see it now is gone. I don't know whether it be flag football or I think you'll need more cases, more the autopsies they've done up at BU, Dr. Stern. I wouldn't be surprised.
There was, I don't know who did the articles a number of years ago, but it was the proliferation of the 300-pound plus player who can run faster than
tackles,
ever before.
Yeah.
This wasn't the NFL of your father's era.
Yeah.
This was, just the sheer, it's force, it's mass times acceleration.
Yeah.
They're
so big.
They're so big and so fast. The combination of which is we're unfortunately seeing the effects of it when we hear about retired football players.
Yeah.
What else were you going to say in your column this weekend?
Let me see. What else? Yeah, I condemn the Providence Teachers Union for trying to shout down some success of the mayoral laws because I think that's very anti-democratic. And I suggest maybe people would find out when the next meeting of the Providence Teachers Union is, go there and shout them down.
Is Bob Whitcomb going to be
I
there?
have no position on their contract. I'd have to do a lot more research. But shouting down a public official, the State of the City address, and the Mayor Lord is a perfectly civil, dignified guy who should get married, though, as we've discussed. I just think that's really bad for civic life. It's unnecessary, and I don't think they did themselves any favor in the court of public opinion.
Well, we can look for that on Sunday.
Yep.
What
And
else?
one other thing. It's a wonderful book about autobiography. It's something like it's called The Shadow in the Garden by a man called James Atlas, who wrote a couple of very good literary autobiographies, and it's about the fleetingness of fame, among other things.
The fleetingness of fame. That
And
sounds
about the art of biography. Yeah.
fantastic.
Very good book.
I look forward to reading, as I always do, your column this weekend.
Okay, great.
And we look forward to seeing you back here next week, hopefully.
See you soon. my
Okay,
friend.
Bob Whitcomb, I will let you go.
Ciao.
Okay. Friday afternoon here at GoLocal in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center has been a busy one. Molly O'Brien was up at the 3 o'clock hour with Lifestyle. 4 o'clock, very busy, kicking off with Michelle McPhee. It was very interesting to talk with the journalist, author, talk show host about her research into the Boston bombing, her new book, Maximum Harm, and her coverage of the MS-13 trial. Talking with UMass Lowell Professor Yu about some of his research into finding out fabrics working with other academics and institutions in Lowell that could potentially be used to be applied to structures such as bridges to detect deficiencies earlier than they can now. Jeff Cannell with the Providence Community Library talking about their big fundraiser, Over the Edge. You can rappel over the Regency Plaza this June if you raise $1,000 to help them reach their $100,000 goal. I said, what do you need the money for? He goes, what do we not need the money for? And of course, Bob Whitcomb, always appreciate him coming here into the studio to talk all things news, politics, and everything going on. So that just about wraps up another week here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. For next week, 3 o'clock, Molly O'Brien, 4 o'clock, Josh Fenton with Business Mondays. But be sure to stay tuned to GoLocalProv.com and finding us on Facebook over the weekend. We'll be bringing you more news and sports and commentary on Sunday. So thanks, everyone. Appreciate your watching. Appreciate your feedback. We'll see you next week. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. News Editor Kate Nagel. News Editor Kate Nagel. News Editor Kate Nagel.